Today on Rad Season, I'm going to be talking to legendary surfer Shaun Tomson. We'll be discussing his time growing up in South Africa, going to Hawaii, being part of the freeride generation, the whole busting down the door era, tube riding at Pipe and off the wall, and his surfing code and how he's helped inspire thousands and thousands of people. Hope you guys enjoy. Shaun, thanks so much for coming on the Rad Season show. It's great to have you here. How are you? How's everything going over in California?
Everything's great. I live in a place called Montecito, which is a little suburb in Santa Barbara. I've lived here for about 25 years. We sold our house recently, just moved into a lovely little new house that we're renovating. So it's chaos at the moment in the Tomson family. Chaos with renovation.
And have you been managing to get out in the water much between renovation and kind of doing everything in the house?
Yeah, I like to slide out in the water every now and then. This is sort of a down season for Santa Barbara, although you can find little waves if you go looking in sort of obscure spots. So there is a little bit of surf around, but primarily here it's the winter season from October through to March.
Okay, which is pretty similar here. I mean, over in Portugal, it's sort of, yes, like summertime, super windy at the moment, but yeah, a couple of months, come September, then everything starts to kind of glass off and the swells start arriving for Europe. So yeah, so what everyone's waiting for. Shaun, I'd love to take it back to the beginning, if that's okay with you, and find out how surfing started for you over in South Africa, in Durban.
So Durban's on the east coast at about 32 degrees latitude. It's a subtropical zone. And my earliest memories of being on the beach, my father was one of South Africa's top competitive swimmers, loved the beach. My mom had been evacuated from Malta during the Second World War. She endured 3,600 air raids. It was the most heavily bombed place in the history of the world. And 4 years she spent in sort of underground shelters from the Nazi and Italian bombing. But she eventually was evacuated and then ended up in South Africa, also became a beach girl. Her and my father loved the beach. So my earliest memories of my dad teaching me how to swim and surf on the beach, even though he'd had a terrible shark attack. It was one of the first recorded instances of a surfer. He was on a little wooden surfboard being attacked by a shark shortly before he was going to be competing and hopefully going to represent South Africa in the Olympics. So even from an early age, I knew that there was danger associated with the surf experience, but we all loved it, and I grew up right across the road from the beach, so it was just sort of a natural evolution from swimming to body surfing to riding these like rubber mats we called lilas, and then onto a little 4'6" belly board, and then ultimately the surfboard, and that was so long ago, but I can still remember that first wave.
That's awesome. And were you pretty much in the water every day? I mean, you said, if you were like living right across the road from the beach.
I was in the water a huge amount. In fact, my father retired really early, and he built this amazing beach buggy that could hold like 6 boards. And if the surf was good, because he lived right across the road from the beach, if the surf was good, he'd come and pick us up from school. My brother, myself, and my cousin Michael. And then if the surf wasn't good, we had to catch the bus home. So tried to surf nearly every day. It was very consistent in Durban, and it was just a pretty cool upbringing to be so connected to the beach. And then I had a traditional sort of post-colonial school upbringing. We wore uniforms, we wore a collar and tie to school, we wore a straw basher my first few years at school, like a boater. So, very much grew up sort of as the last outpost of the British Empire.
And how was that? I mean, was it quite a strict school and like the upbringing over there?
Well, it was a very strict school, but you must also remember I grew up under apartheid, which was the system of segregation that the South African regime that we were all living under then. So there was definitely sort of a duality in the experience, being part of the sort of white community, and then there was so much injustice towards the black community. But we grew up under a very liberal family. My father and mother were both very liberal. So at that time under apartheid, it wasn't like every white South African was a racist or was in favor of apartheid and segregation. We were very liberal, and I started traveling at a young age, and saw the negative impact that apartheid can have. When you're growing up, you don't really realize it, but as soon as you travel, you see the injustice. And certainly in the later part of my life, I've really tried to help young people, young people of color, white kids, whatever. I've just tried to help young kids realize their dreams.
And your father, he was pretty heavily involved within, well, I guess the birth of professional surfing over there, right? And he was one of the founders of one of the first pro events there, is that right?
Yeah, he was the founder of, actually, it's the longest running professional surfing event in the world. It was called the Gunston 500. It was one of the premier events on the world tour in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. I mean, I won the event 6 times in a row. It was one of the leading events during sort of the formative era of pro surfing. He co-founded the event with a couple of his friends. And, my dad loved Hawaii, and he loved Hawaiian surfers. When he was recuperating from his shark attack, he had to go over to San Francisco for arm surgery. And he ended up in Hawaii when there was only 2 hotels on the beach in Waikiki, and befriended the whole Kahanamoku family. And Duke Kahanamoku had been one of his swimming heroes when he was young, and Duke became one of my heroes. And when my dad had the contest, the first person they invited out to compete was former world champion Midget Farrelly from Australia. Midget came out there for a couple of years, and then my dad was always so excited about inviting Hawaiian surfers, and he invited Eddie Aikau out to come and compete in South Africa. And interestingly, when Eddie came out to compete, he was supposed to be staying in the Malibu Hotel, which was one of the leading hotels on the beachfront in Durban. And the manager at the time said, "No, you can't stay here, you're black," complete racist. So I remember, I was 15 years old, 15 or 16, going down with my father and picking up Eddie, and Eddie came and stayed with us. And I had to take Eddie around while he was in South Africa. And we showed him that yes, he'd been subjected to apartheid, but not every South African was a racist. And, we tried to expose him to what was good. And he never forgot it, Eddie. And, when I'd go to Hawaii when I was a young boy, and he'd invite me around to meet his family, it was a wonderful, he had that spirit in the same way that Nelson Mandela had the spirit of forgiveness and reconciliation. He realized that all surfers are connected. And it was wonderful to meet him and actually see the injustice through his eyes. It was wonderful. But amongst the darkness, there was a lot of goodness in South Africa too.
Were you then going over to Hawaii then? Like when Eddie came over to visit you, was that sort of when your kind of journey over to the islands began?
Well, my journey to the islands really began in 1969. My father took me there. I'm Jewish, for my bar mitzvah present. So my first experience of Hawaii was 69, and it happened to be like the biggest winter of all time. I mean, I rode some of the biggest waves I'd ever ridden when I was just 14, surfing this place called Makaha Point. And Makaha Point surf is like a 25 to 30 feet like J Bay. Waimea is just this big steep drop, but point surf at Waimea, point surf at Makaha is just another experience. And I nearly drowned on the one day. I remember paddling out there, and there was only 6 guys out, some of the best surfers in the world, Greg Knoll and all these massive big wave riders, Randy Rarick and Keith Paul, Rolf Arness. And they said to me, "Well, Shaun, what are you doing out here?" I said, "I just come out to try to get at you." And then, of course, these massive 25 to 30-foot sets start marching. It was quite an experience.
That's amazing. And this is obviously before leg ropes. I mean, you know.
Oh yeah, there's no leg ropes. Leg ropes only came into being in 1971. And even when, when leg ropes became popularized, in big surf, we often wouldn't use them. We were too afraid that, you might get caught up with your leg rope. So it was just, you had to learn it. You had to be fit, and you had to know how to swim and body surf and really be a waterman, because no one's going to blast out on a jet ski to rescue you. You're not going to have a float vest on. It's like, you got to rely on yourself. And I think it just brings a little bit of a different sensibility. Today guys are riding big waves, and certainly much bigger waves than we rode, and they have a whole support team, and they'll have jet skis and people and secondary jet skis to watch out for them. So I think the anxiety level when you have a big wipeout is in some ways certainly mitigated. You can have a guy who's been surfing for 3 months and can win the world riding the world's biggest waves. It's just a different experience, I think. Not to take anything away from the amazing achievements these guys are doing, but I think the anxiety level is just, I think, a little bit different.
And how did it translate between riding the waves back at home in South Africa to then surfing much larger waves over in Hawaii?
Well, I tried to just bring my style, which was speed, power, aggression, rhythm, all based on power, to riding the waves in Hawaii. I tried to ride the waves in Hawaii just like I was riding the waves in South Africa. And I was lucky enough to grow up across from probably one of the most technically challenging and one of the longest tube rides at the time in the world, a place called the Bay of Plenty. I mean, you could get 20-second tube rides, which, Skeleton Bay hadn't been discovered. These amazing waves in the Mentawais hadn't been discovered. It was certainly comparable to Kira in Australia, but a lot more consistent, and I think a lot more heavy too. So, and technical, it was really a tube that helped me develop a new style of actually riding inside the tube, as opposed to the Jerry Lopez style, which was sort of, shoot the arrow and let it fly. And it was very much sort of a beautiful, artistic straight line approach. But my approach was based around the Bay of Plenty, when you had this wave that was hitting the sandbank and warbling and doubling up and just really long and fast. And I tried to take that approach to riding the waves at Backdoor, which was a completely sort of new, innovative approach. And it was really, for me, it was a very creative time to be drawing completely new lines in the tube, both riding inside, escaping through the back of the wave. I invented this maneuver called the turnout, which is when you ride inside. I mean, it's great to see all the guys use it today. You needed to escape. You didn't want to straighten out, and invented that style of, today they call it riding out the doggy door, that maneuver of escaping when you're inside that tube and then escaping through the side or escaping through the back of the wave, turning out back into the wave. So, I had a lot more escape routes than the other guys at the time. Of course, you've only got like a 1 or 2 or 3 year little head start there, and then everyone starts using those techniques. And today, the way that Kelly Slater and the other guys have taken tube riding to the next level, it's just wonderful to see. But it's also very satisfying to know that you were part of that evolution, and you were part of building that brick in the wall. So for me, it's been very very gratifying to be a part of that evolution of surfing.
And who were you, I guess, looking up to back then? Like, was it the Hawaiians? And there was a group. There was a group of you that went over, which is sort of now what's been known as the freeride generation. And yeah, how did you sort of see it when you first got over, and when you were doing winters over there?
Well, we had our group of. We had a very tight group, and we were all like hitting it hard together. In Cairns, Rabbit Bartholomew, Peter Townend, Mark Richards. We were all like we were like, we just wanted to be the best in the world, and we were taking on radical, aggressive stuff. But the guys that we really looked up to, for me, I would say the three guys were Jeff Hackman. I love the way Jeff surfed. Barry Kanaipuni, just radical, full-on, aggressive. Like, Barry had he was so radical that 50% of the time he'd be swimming, but he'd be trying in such a radical maneuver. And then maybe Reno Abelero, who's probably the most stylish surfer of all time, a guy that could ride 1 foot, or he could ride 30 feet. And also in incredible shape, as was Barry Kanaipuni. I mean, I won my first big event in Hawaii riding a BK surfboard, but he was in amazing shape. And he actually inspired Mark Richards to create his first twin fin. So, Reno is certainly, one of the most fundamental surfing revolutionaries of all times. And then I would say those were my top three. And then certainly, Jerry Lopez had his beautiful style and his wonderful technique at Banzai Pipeline. But another one of our contemporaries that I missed was Simon Anderson. I mean, what an amazing surfer, surfboard designer. So, our crew, in their own way, all of them were revolutionary. They all made a huge mark on surfing. PT, Ian, Rabbit, Mark Richards, Simon. I mean, all of them are like, it wasn't like they just went out and won contests and went home. I mean, they all had a fundamental impact. And I was so honored to be a part of that crew. It was an amazing crew, and it was an amazing journey. And I think anyone that's in surfing today can look at every single one of those guys for one form of inspiration or another. Every one of them in their own right, not just collectively, made a huge impact.
And what do you think, I mean, now looking back on all those years and all those times together, what are some of your fondest memories from being over in Hawaii?
In 1975 and 76, and you mentioned a guy called Bill Delaney made a movie called Free Ride. And it was really representative of that generation. We weren't in it. Our sole reason for surfing wasn't to win contests. That was just part of it. We were in it for that free ride. And then out of that evolved the whole busting down the door vibe that Rabbit wrote about and I made a film about with my partner, Jeremy Gosh. So both of those times were really wonderful for me, the aspect of the freedom and the free spirit and the traveling and the adventure associated with free ride, and then the whole professional movement associated with busting down the door and changing surfing and starting pro surfing. So I think those were, and then the whole creativity associated with all of our surfing and the boards changing and tube riding and bending time and space and curving the wall to my will, all that stuff. It was so such wonderful, pure memories, and everything that I've done, I think, in surfing and in my life has come from that pure place, from that pure love and passion and stoke for surfing.
From what I've heard, I mean, when you used to go out and surf, you'd be in the water pretty much all day. I mean, you were.
Oh, the whole day.
For grommet, you loved it. You'd always be out there.
I would be in the water the whole day. And I've got a really good mate of mine. He's like one of the top attorneys on the West Coast. He's lectures at Stanford University here on law. And he would say, Shaun, I used to use you in my lectures. I'd use you as an example. He said, I once asked Shaun Tomson, like, how did he become a great surfer? How did he become a world champion? And how did he become the youngest guy to win the oldest guy? Like, what's the success of your career? I said, I used to love it more. I loved it more. I would stay in the water longer than anyone else. I'd catch more waves. I'd be out there longer. And I just had that unbelievable passion. And even until a few years ago, when I go to J Bay, I'd stay out the whole day, 8-hour sessions. And like Kelly Slater would come up to me and say, "Hey, Shaun, what's happening? And how can you stay out there so long?" It was funny. And I just loved it. And, even when my career was long gone, I would stay out the whole day because I loved it. I loved the sensation and loved the stoke of it and loved the challenge.
Nice. And your cousin was also over there with you, Michael. What was your relationship with him? Was it was it friendly, or was it competitive, or like a little bit of both?
Well, it was both friendly, it was familial, and it was competitive. And actually, sorry, I forgot to include Mike as part of the crew, because he was just an amazing surfer, full-on power, aggro. But also, here's a very, very, very thoughtful, creative person. And really, I think, changed the texture of surfing culture and the surfing industry too. Certainly his surfing at Banzai Pipeline was amazing. And Mike just liked to live on the edge. You know what I mean? He liked to live on the edge in the way he surfed, in the way he did business, and also his personal lifestyle. And it was very sad to lose Mike last year, but he impacted so many lives in such a positive way that we had a great relationship. My father would, if the surf was good, he'd pick me and my brother up and then pick up Michael. Michael was at a different school and take us surfing. Every single surf trip, Mike was like Mike was part of the family. I think my dad saw him as much as his own father saw him, and my dad was a fundamental influence on Mike's surfing, and Mike was a fundamental influence on my surfing because, we were very competitive, but in a good, positive way. We were always pushing each other to the max. So, I have great fond memories of my cousin Michael, and we're sorry we lost him so young.
Yeah, sorry for your loss. After the sort of the professional side of it, and like professional surfing, and like both of you then went off on an entrepreneurial journey, and you set up your own brand, Instinct. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I set up Instinct when I was on the pro tour. In fact, Michael set up his company, Gotcha, the year before. And, maybe it was something that Mike did that stimulated me to start Instinct. I called it Instinct because the tube riding was my focus, and the best moments in surfing are riding inside the tube, and the best tubes happen when you're operating on instinct, when you're just not really thinking and instinct takes over. So it was a name that was very dear to me. Started the company in like 79 and used a logo that my dad had helped develop for me in the early 70s, a beautiful like surf logo. And it was an amazing experience. It became the #1 brand in South Africa. It was like #3 internationally. Quicksilver was #1. I'm talking the core business. Quicksilver was #1, Gotcha #2. Instinct was #3, and sponsored Barton Lynch to a world championship in 1988, sponsored Tom Carroll to 2 world titles in 84 and 85. In fact, he beat me in 85. I was first most of the year, and then he just beat me in the end at the Australian leg, and he was first and I was second. So, it was a powerful brand, and really loved to be associated with the business aspect of surfing as well. So certainly, I think surfing taught me a lot about being an entrepreneur, about focus, about commitment, about passion, about doing something you love and creating a brand around something you love. And then I sold Instinct when I retired from the tour in 1990. In fact, I bought it back a few years ago, and my wife and I have taken over sole ownership now. It's being we're relaunching it in South Africa with a guy called, we're relaunching it in Australia with a guy called Cameron Williams in about a month, which is going to be pretty exciting to go up against the big guns, our little soulful brand, because not many brands today are owned by founders. It's all big private equity and venture capital that own the big brands today. I think my friend Paul Nordie has one of the few few brands that's actually owned by a founder in the surf industry. So that's going to be pretty exciting. But I sold Instinct, and then my wife and I stayed in South Africa for a few years, and then we moved to the United States in 1995. I actually got my first real job in 1995, I like to say, and I was hired by Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia, and I worked for Patagonia for a couple of years. He was amazing to us. After I retired from the tour and decided to move to America, I interviewed with a lot of companies, and like I couldn't get hired by a surfing company. It was really interesting. And then on my last day in America, I went down and interviewed with Patagonia, and I said, listen, I'm going back to South Africa. You need to have an offer at the end of the day. And they gave me an offer, and they brought my whole family out, and they were amazing to me. And it was an amazing company to work for and learn about responsibility, not just environmental responsibility, but social responsibility, about just doing the right thing, and that doing the right thing can impact the bottom line significantly. And I really learned that doing good is good for business from Yvon and that wonderful brand, Patagonia. And then eventually worked for them for a couple of years. And then my wife, Carla, and I went out on our own. We started another company called Solitude. And Instinct was about the chew, Solitude was about escape. Because, at that time in my life, I just wanted to think about busting out, paddling out towards the open horizon. And the brand did nicely, and then ultimately, after about 7 or 8 years, we sold it to a large publicly traded corporation, and stayed on for a few years working. And then everything came to an end for me. My whole life, our lives changed. We lost our beautiful son, Matthew. Just 15 and a half, we lost him to a bad decision. Played a dangerous game called the choking game that he heard about at school, and killed him. And it was a dreadful time for us. But out of that came a new beginning for my wife, and also for myself. And I went down a completely different path. I went down a completely different path. And surfing helped me on the road to get back and paddle out again, and paddle back to find a new way. And it all came from this little book. It all came from a little card, in fact, that I wrote. And it's amazing how life can work. None of us know what's in store for us. And people say that, you've got to plan it out. And yes, planning is like really important. But if you've got strong values, I think you can survive. And luckily, I grew up from my mom and dad and with strong values. And then surfing taught me so much too. So a friend of mine who had started Surfrider Foundation phoned me up in the 90s. He'd actually phoned me up in 1984 when Surfrider was just starting, and he said, Shaun, we need you to be our first ambassador. And I became an ambassador for Surfrider Foundation in 1984. And he said, we need a poster, and we need an advertising slogan for Surfrider. And I wrote it. I wrote 5 words: do a good turn today. And there was a picture of me riding a Benzai pipeline, doing a bottom turn. And then I've been associated with Surfrider ever since. And a number of years later, he phoned me up and said, Shaun, you helped us with Surfrider Foundation so long ago. Rincon's facing a severe environmental challenge. We need your help here to solve this problem. He said, we're having a group of kids come down to the beach, and I want to highlight this problem. All the homeowners were connected up to septic tank systems that would overflow when it rained, and overflow out into the river and out into the break and make the surf sick. He said, we need to highlight the problem, and I'm bringing a group of kids down, give them something. You've got $100 budget. I'm bringing down like 100 kids. So I thought, like, what can I do? I went home that night, and I wrote out on a piece of paper 12 lines, every line beginning with I will. And I wrote the fundamental lessons that surfing had taught me about life. I will never turn my back on the ocean. I will realize that all surfers are joined by one ocean. I will take the drop with commitment. just words that were very important to me, and they are metaphors that can be interpreted in many ways. So I printed the lines up onto a little card, and I called it Surface Code. 12 lines, every line beginning with 105 words. I wrote it in 20 minutes, and I still carry it around with me in my wallet.
Oh, cool.
And I handed them out to the kids. Kids loved them, media loved them. And at the time we had our company Solitude, we had so many demands for the cards and we just kept printing more and more, thousands and thousands of them. And then we started putting the little card in the pocket of our shirts and board shorts. So tens of thousands of these cards were just being distributed out into the surfing universe. And then people phoned me up and started asking me to talk at their different groups about a code, about values, about commitment, about passion, about purpose. And that was the next wave for me, man. Because at one of the events, I met a guy who said, Shaun, you should write a book. And I wrote my first book with him, Patrick Moser. It was called Surface Code, and it was an exploration of those 12 lines, and book became very popular. It was one of the top books ever on surfing, and we went through like 17 printings. It was very popular. And then after we lost our son Matthew, the code was like solace for me. It was like my way forward. And then when I started talking to large groups, I found out that it really helped me. I would talk about the lessons of the Surface Code, and one of the groups I went to, I'd met the headmaster in the lineup at Rincon, and the environmental problem got solved. And he said, Shaun, can you come and talk at my school? So I went along and spoke at his school. He only had 80 students. It was in the little farmhouses, 2 little farmhouses here in Santa Barbara. And when I was chatting to the kids, I said, Surface Code's my code. I wrote it 12 lines, every line beginning with I will, 105 words. I wrote it in 20 minutes. What about your code? What about you guys and girls all writing your own code? 20 minutes. Send it to me. So about a week later, I got 80 kids times 12, nearly 1,000 lines of code back. And the very first line of code I got back was, I will always be myself, from a young girl, Elena Elsera. She was 13 at the time. And I just thought, wow, what a profound statement from a young girl. She wasn't going to be victimized. She wasn't going to be a victim of peer pressure. She was just going to be herself. And based on what had happened to our beautiful boy, he played this game because he learned about it at school, and who knows whether kids, there was this peer pressure to play this game and take a risk. I don't know. But this girl was showing power. And then all the other lines, I will have faith, I will pray, just amazing lines. I will not compromise on my morals to fit in with others. I thought, this is amazing. So I immediately phoned up Patrick. I said, hey, Patrick, got to do another book. So we wrote a second book together. It's called The Code, The Power of I Will. And the book was written to activate positive decision-making amongst kids by getting them to write their codes. And the book became popular. It was #1 on Amazon in the teen section for a while, which was a great thrill. And now I speak to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and get people all over the world to write their codes and share their codes in some of the largest companies in the world, massive companies. I did a virtual engagement for thousands and thousands of people at Gilead Sciences, who had invented the first cure for the first treatment for COVID called remdesivir, for all their teams. And we found that when people write and share their code, they share their innermost spirit. I call it writing in spirit language. And when other people see what you've written, the positivity and the power and the passion and the purpose, it creates this wave of hope throughout an organization. And, through COVID, I've spoken to about 150,000 people virtually. And when I start my engagements, I ask them, send me a word that describes how you're feeling. So I've had hundreds of thousands of words come through the internet to me, and I put them up on the screen. I use this amazing technology called Poll Everywhere, and I can see what people at large are feeling. And the 4 words, I call it a sad state of mind: stress, anxiety, despair, and disconnection. Those have been the most popular words. And then at the end of it, everyone writes their codes. And it creates a fundamental mind shift. And it's incredible to see how thinking about a new perspective, thinking about your life differently, can create hope. And that's what the code does. The code creates hope. And if you got time, I want to read you a letter from a young girl. And I want to read you this letter that I got about a month ago after I did a presentation. So when I do it with kids now, they got to write the codes together and share them. And then they got to write a letter. They can write whatever they want, but they just got to write me a letter. It's part of the program. So this young girl writes, I will better myself every day in ways I may not know yet. I will be who I want to be. I will not hide the worst parts of myself, but embrace and learn from them. It's 14-year-old. I will help others who aren't getting the same opportunities as me. I will bring awareness to what I think is wrong. I will never alter my opinions as to what society wants them to be. I will hear my own pain. I will be grateful in every way. I will love anyone and everyone always. I will remember I can and am loved. I'll be determined to reach my goals, but not frustrated or angry when I fall a little short, but get back up and do it again. So those are her 12 lines. And then she writes this letter. Because my code is about hope. My code is open source code. It can be used by anyone, anywhere, anytime, for anything that can help them and help others. And this is this young girl's letter. I cried when I read this letter. I personally have had a hard time making room for myself and making sure I'm doing all right. When I first started writing these codes out, I thought my goals would be simple, such as get good grades or be successful in life. But I realized when I started writing of them that I didn't want them to be like that. Rather, I wanted them to give more back to me. Your talk helped me look deep into my own needs and struggles and how I could best help myself right now, especially since I haven't been that stable mentally recently. Thank you for the advice in your story, but also thank you for helping me realize that I wasn't completely okay. And it's all right to take care of yourself a little bit instead of just looking after everyone else. It's been too long since I've been able to love myself. And unknowingly, you gave me the push to go look for that love again. So thank you. Even if this wasn't exactly what you hoped to achieve through this talk, thank you. Because since then, I started getting the help I need. And I know it won't be easy, but I will love myself again. And I will wake up tomorrow better than I am now. And I will continue to do so until I have found myself again. So thank you for the hope you've shared with me. I was blown away. So I've got to tell you, I think right now, when I was a pro surfer, I thought I had the best job in the world, the best. But now, I think I got the best job in the world because I can give some hope, and it's awesome, and it helps me deal with the loss that I've had. I can give, and the code can give hope, and it's such an amazing tool. And just for anyone that's listening, use it, man. 12 lines. Every line beginning with I will. Share it with your family, share it with your friends, read it to one another, create a positive wave.
And it descends everything, right? So it doesn't matter, like, you know, gender, age, race, whether you surf, whether you don't, it doesn't matter, right? It's sort of...
You are right. It is so unifying, and we need hope, and we need unity in this world, man. We need hope, and we need unity. And the code is, I mean, there's many, many I mean, psychologists have studied my method. They call it an intervention. There's many, many amazing interventions out there. But I tell you what, I use mine. I use it with rehab clinics. I use it with prisons. I use it with large corporations, poor schools, rich schools, universities, postgrad programs. It, like you say, it's completely, anyone can use it. It just takes 20 minutes and then you've got to share it.
And what's next? What are you going to be working on? Have you got any more books coming up, or?
So yeah, working on a few new things. I finished a new book. New book's going to be released next year, which is it's a collaboration with a Pulitzer-nominated philosopher and poet. It's a book about spirituality. It's called The Surfer and the Sage. So I'm excited about that book. And then I'm working on creating this online program for the code. So anyone, anywhere, if they need a boost of hope, can jump on it and use it. Been tossing around some wave pool ideas as well, which has been great. I think it's amazing what's happening with technology. So I've been in discussions with some people, because I really think that, I use surfing as a tool to uplift people in the context of a vicarious experience. It's not the actual experience, but I think an actual experience can really help young people if it's aligned with the code. So I'm really excited about that. And then also instinct. It's kind of a new thing to see where that goes. We're going to see if it bubbles up in Australia, and then that
where do you think it will go? I saw some pretty good footage of you at Kelly's ranch, and yeah, there was looked like there was Ian and a few of you out there. Looked like you had this must be, I don't know, going back a couple of years now, but yeah, where do you think the technology of wave pools is going to head?
I think it's evolving in such a wonderful way. I think it's going to democratize surfing in some ways. Surfing still has that. I think it must be intimidating for a lot of people. That not just the aspect of riding a wave, but just paddling out there in that sort of grouping that his experience has been involved with surfing for a lot. So I think that it's just going to be a sort of a different experience, and I think there's going to be a much steeper learning curve. People are going to improve at a much greater rate. I think we're only touching the surface of what can be done in terms of surfboard design. I mean, what I'm waiting for is to see, and I had this dream, to see Kerry Slater riding a surfboard that's no bigger than his feet. And he's shot in on a little chute that's on the side of the wave, and he's just shot into the wave, stands there, shoo, he goes in with a surfboard as big as his feet, and he takes surfing inside a wave pool to the next level. So I think the equipment revolution in the context of wave pools, it hasn't even started yet. And it's going to come from that surfboard designer in the same way that Rena Abellera, Mark Richards, Simon Anderson created the revolution. I think there's going to be a new revolution, and it's going to come in wave pools.
Nice. And yeah, I mean, it's been a while since there has been, those big revolutions since, well, I don't know if you would say like Simon's thruster, and obviously there's been different variations in board design since then, but yeah, any kind of big shake-up, it's been a while.
Yeah, 1981. I mean, Simon bought that board out in 1981. I remember I was in the final with him at the 2SM Coke Surfer Bar. He just won bells. And he beat me in the final. He was first, I was second. Monday morning, I phoned him up. I said, hey, Simon, love to get a board from you. And remember then, we were great rivals. I mean, I was in the top 6. Simon was in the top 6. And he did it. And that was his spirit. And I think it's a lesson for all of us is that the technology that he developed, he shared. And I really took that to heart. And that's why this little code that I've developed, it's for everyone. Just like the thruster was for everyone, my little code is for everyone. It's open source.
And for being a surfer for so long, I mean, and sort of like now looking back, what do you think have been some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Surfing has it's given me so much. And when I wrote this little surface code card so long ago, I remember sitting there and I'm going like, what were the lessons that surfing really taught me? What did it really teach me, and what have I really committed to? And I tell you what, I want to read it. I want to read it to everyone. I'll never turn my back on the ocean. Obviously, that's about love, passion, environmentalism. I'll always paddle back out. It's about resilience. It's also about hope too. Because only when you paddle out are you going to get your next wave. I'll take the drop with commitment. Just power, commitment. If you want something, you have to go after it hard. You have to be courageous. I know that there will always be another wave. For me, that's just hope. I know that there will always be another wave, and optimism too. I'm optimistic. I realize that all surfers are joined by one ocean. That's we're all part of a broader, larger community. It's not an insular aspect to life. We're all part of this community. I'll paddle around the impact zone. Sometimes it's better not to deal with problems head on and just be more thoughtful and introspective and perhaps paddle around the conflict. I'll never fight a riptide. My dad used to say to me, Shaun, you get caught, never fight a riptide. Yes, it has a danger aspect to it, but also, there are those big inexorable riptides and trends through life that one can't fight. And people say, oh, well, what about busting down the door? I say, well, sometimes you've got to bust down the door too. Sometimes you've got to try to swim against it, but you've got to be cognizant of that riptide. I'll watch out for other surfers after a big set. Also, community respect for others. Because one day, man, that wave's going to hammer you and going to kick the hell out of you. You better hope someone else is going to be there to rescue you. I will pass on my stoke to a non-surfer. What I do when I do these events, small and large, I like to think I pass on my stoke. And it's such an amazing feeling to stoke someone else up, to get someone interested in surfing. And it's just good for the soul to help someone else. I'll ride and not paddle into shore. Many times you sit out there and I've got to go in, I've got my appointment. And yeah, I'm never paddling. And it's just about respect for oneself, respect for the environment, and also completion. If you start something, when you paddle out and you paddle out for that first time and that open horizons there, and you're paddling out and you're so stoked and excited, and you can't end it just by paddling into shore. And this one, I will catch a wave every day, even in my mind. Life gets busy. I can't surf every day. I've got like stuff going on, but sometimes you just need that moment when you can just spiritually disconnect and then connect with surfing. Today they call it mindfulness or well-being and meditation. And my meditation is just like catching that wave in my mind, even if I can't do it. And then the last one makes me think of Juka Hanamoku, surfing's very first Olympian. Makes me think of my dad. I will honor the sport of kings. And it makes me think of how I've always perceived surfing. I've always perceived surfing in the same way that Rabbit and Ian and PT and Mike Thompson and Mark Richards, we thought it was the greatest sport in the world. We thought as sportsmen and as an endeavor, it was tennis, golf, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, man, surfing was better. And that we should honor it. Man, and I did too. I honor the sport of kings.
Shaun, thanks so much for opening up, and it's been amazing hearing all the stories from surfing back in the day, over in South Africa and Hawaii, and then now all the incredible work that you're doing with the code, and sort of helping others and inspiring people. It's been amazing talking to you.
Awesome. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you.